right, good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to welcome everybody to our webinar today. So my name is Julie Key, and our webinar today is going to actually be discussing a new service for 360 Energy, which is a bit of a net zero toolkit. It's designed to help organizations like yours navigate and meet the requirements in obtaining net zero and in achieving carbon solutions for your business. Just a bit about 360 Energy. We've been in existence since 1995, delivering continuous improvement for customers by embedding energy management practices, which we measure energy and environmental costs and prove that they're controllable. We tend to work in two main areas. One's advising customers on how to optimize their energy procurement, operating costs, mitigating future risk, reducing greenhouse gases, and proactively managing carbon, and working with organizations to reduce their utility consumption, which does include things like electricity, natural gas, diesel, and water. The backbone of 360 Energy's solution is really capturing energy information and helping customers understand energy data and using this information to, in the end of it all, help your business. Today's webinar is going to be presented by John Pooley, who's the Vice President of Program Development for 360 Energy. He's based in the UK and has quite an extensive experience in carbon management in both the UK and the European Union. So he does and has worked with a wide range of organizations, including industry, commerce, utilities, and local governments as well. And he's also actively involved in the development of international standards as both a BSI and ISO Committee member. So before I hand things over to John today, I just wanted to get started on just a few housekeeping items. As with most of our webinars, if you've attended our webinars before, we do keep everybody muted. This is just to reduce background noise so we can have nice, clear communication. We do definitely encourage people to ask questions. We do have a question function on our chat, the little control panel that you have on your screen. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We are going to be we're going to be answering the questions at the end. But as you have questions come up, please feel free to ask them in the question function on the control panel for this webinar. Just a little bit, we'll be keeping today's presentation within 45 minutes. So that would be inclusive of questions. So we're going to be wrapping things up right about 1:45. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand things over to John to get started.
Thank you, Julie, and good morning, good afternoon, or wherever you are to you. So let's get started. Next slide then, please. So the question starting point is what is the issue? And climate change is a massive issue that we've got to address. And it may seem a little difficult at the moment in the midst of a pandemic, and then we're worrying about an economy. But as we know, we're going to get through the pandemic, we're going to head into new economy, and then we're going to have climate change potentially hit us with another wave of problems. And there's universal agreement that we need to do something about this. Today's not the place to really go into the science, but if I can have the next slide. The science is telling us that we've warmed the planet by about 1 degree from pre-industrial levels. And we already are experiencing a range of abnormal weather, issues with wildfires, storms, etc. And there's a whole range of reasons for concern. And the science tells us that if we can't limit to about 1.5 degrees, most of these are going to get pretty severe and pretty serious. And as we stand at the moment, well, we could be heading for a 2 degree increase. So something's got to happen there. Initially, a lot of this was driven by governments, but now we're seeing increasingly more and more corporations are signing up to the concept of doing something. So next slide. So what is net zero? One thing I will say is that there are a variety of different definitions about what net zero is, and that's something that at 360 we can help you with. But I've listed here three things: the fact, the aspiration, and the practice. The fact is climate change is driven by GHG emissions. If we're going to limit climate change, we've got to either reduce, eliminate, or remove GHG emissions. The aspiration, the ideal target would be that we had zero emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, even better than that, maybe we were sucking up more than we emitted. But that's an aspiration, and that's going to be quite tough to get to. But the practice is that we can get to net zero. And with net zero, you reduce your emissions to the lowest level, and then you purchase or acquire offsets for your residual emissions. So that's, in simple terms, net zero is trying to make sure that we're not adding to the mass of greenhouse gases that are there, and we limit climate change. Next slide. Well, why go for net zero? I think one point is I think that any corporation expecting to do business in 20 years' time needs to consider what net zero might mean for it, and probably needs to commit to it. But if you don't commit and you think it's not for me, I think you need to be aware that supply chains are increasingly demanding carbon information and carbon performance improvement along the line. And what we do know from research and talking to people, that not going for net zero will have some negative impacts. It's likely that investors and other sources of capital may be limited if you're not showing that you're doing something. It's possible your company credit ratings could be impacted, and it's also possible that there may be increases in litigation as going forward. So next slide. But the bottom line here, or not quite, well, that's it, thank you. The bottom line here is, one way or another, although we're talking about an environmental issue, finance will drive you to address carbon. Next slide. So who's already committed to net zero? And you can see here we've got a variety of company names. We recently had 150 global corporations urging world leaders for a net zero recovery. I'm going to be open with you. I think a number of these companies are saying things and not necessarily delivering. If we look at the slide we've got there, I'm just going to pick two out. I mean, BP are saying that they're going to do an awful lot, have yet to deliver. On the other hand, Maple Leaf have said they're going to do something and are delivering, and are currently a net zero organisation. But why it's important to know about all these big companies that are doing it is the chances are, as I said earlier, these are going to be the ones that are going to put the pressure on the supply chain and then be requiring you to do something on their behalf. Next slide then. So what can net zero carbon do for you? Well, it can keep you compliant with legislation and regulation. In fact, it probably can keep you ahead of it. It can help you to meet your environmental, social and governance targets, which may be imposed corporately on you. It certainly can improve your reputation if you do it well. If you do it badly, it probably has a negative impact. It can future-proof operations, and if it's done the right way, it can increase your profitability. Next slide. So do you need to make a firm commitment today to going to net zero to benefit? Next slide. No, you certainly don't. And in fact, I would counsel against committing to net zero too soon. That's part of the problem we're seeing with some corporations that are saying something and then are unable to report what they're doing. So you need to think about it, but you don't necessarily need to commit to it. And if you start working towards net zero, you will see benefit. Next slide. You'll notice that we're talking about net zero carbon, and the reason we're doing that is that we believe that the most effective approach to zero emissions is to start by looking at carbon emissions. And part of the reason for that is that carbon emissions themselves account for over 80% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, next slide. So we know what it is. How are we going to get there? And I've reduced it down here to 4 steps, which maybe look simple, but require a structured approach to deliver. First, you reduce your carbon-based energy use. You could in parallel switch to no or low carbon energy supplies. Third, you look at producing no or low carbon energy yourself. This could be solar panels, wind farms, etc. And then fourth is you offset your residual carbon emissions. And we leave that to the last because it's going to cost you money to offset, whereas the other 3 will probably be positive. Okay, next slide. Why are we offering carbon solutions? As a company, I mean, we've worked in the energy field since 1995, and in that time we've been working with customers, and we've been managing their energy. And of course, by doing that, we've actually been delivering carbon reduction. We also know that it's time that we've all got to really come forward and say that we're going to do something about climate change. But we do know from experience that customers do need sensible, pragmatic ways of understanding and reducing carbon, even if they're not committed to it. And maybe through that, they will understand what it is and be able to take it to its fullest extent. And the 4th point really is that reducing carbon through energy management is highly cost effective. Next slide. So at this point, I'd like to introduce you to the 360 offering. We've spent some time putting this together. It's based on our experience with energy management, but also with my experience in the UK and EU in carbon management. And I'm hoping that I know what we're offering you will offer the best approach to dealing with carbon issues. Next slide. What we have is we have effectively a net zero toolkit, and you can see it's here in this sort of looped diagram. Ideally, anybody would be taking on net zero would address all of these issues, but the way we're offering them, you can take any one of these as part of the toolkit, or you can follow through on a pathway and utilize all of them. A good reason for doing this is we do appreciate that many of our customers may be at different parts on their carbon journey. So the idea is we've got tools that will help you whichever part of that journey you're on. Next slide. I'm now going to go through each of the elements and just give you a little bit of background to it. The Carbon Advisory, this is our trusted advice service. This is the starting point. And it's important to make it clear that we provide independent and quality advice. We're not interested in anybody as commercial interest other than yours when we're giving it. It's an ideal approach for you to understand what's going on and what you could be doing. And I'll expand on this one on the next slide. So if we go on to the next slide, please. There's two real sort of deliverables that we can do here. I mean, first one is basically just talking to you and finding out where you are. But the 2 sort of modular parts of this are a climate change risk assessment. And in this, that we'd identify what regulation impacts you, what the cost impact, both positive and negative, of looking at carbon issues could be. We'd also consider adaptation, and this is preparing for the impacts of climate change, as well as looking at what it would do for your reputation and opportunity identification. And this can be an ideal way of understanding what climate change is going to do to you and how you can deal with it. The other service there is the zero carbon gap analysis, And that's looking at where you are at the moment in terms of carbon management and where you want to be, and identifying what you need to do and the best ways of doing it. And there's also a number of bespoke opportunities that we can look at with you there. If we move on to the next slide, the next slide is the Enterprise Carbon Coach, and this is based on our highly successful Energy Coach program. And this is a cross-disciplinary program that runs over an extended period of time and would really take you from a starting point right through to a degree of excellence in carbon, let alone a degree of excellence in energy. Next slide. Carbon accounting. Now, carbon accounting is a fundamental foundation of net zero carbon management. You need to understand how much carbon you're actually producing. It becomes quite interesting because carbon accounting is not like accounting of regular fuels and other solid substances. You need to have proxies, you need to understand emissions factors, you need to know how to handle it, you need to know what baselines to go against, and we'll be providing you with a complete carbon accounting service that's tailored to where you are and what you need, and that helps you understand where your opportunities are and also to track your performance improvement. Okay, next slide. Okay, the next slide here, we're looking at renewable energy procurement. Now, excuse me, one way of reducing your carbon input is to actually purchase renewable or lower carbon energy. Now, this may not be possible in all jurisdictions, and it may not be possible for all energy sources, but it can be quite a good way of moving towards an emissions reduction, because you don't necessarily have to change your operation. So if you were in a jurisdiction where you had a high carbon content electricity supply, but you could procure a zero carbon supply, you could effectively reduce that element of your footprint to zero merely through procurement. But like anything else, you need to know the best time to buy, how to buy, and building on 360's general energy procurement expertise and services, we're offering renewable energy procurement. Next slide. Now, at some point in your sort of net zero journey, you're going to need to look at technology solutions. And this could be anything from undertaking audits, equipment audits, operational audits, through to the managing of projects that are implementing low energy, for example, LED lighting, or it could be cogeneration or renewable electricity generation projects. That's an area where we would provide project management and services to help you realise that. Okay, next slide. And then the sort of final piece is offsetting. If you've done everything that's going before, you might still be in a situation that you have residual emissions. So, for example, you may have a process that's running on natural gas and there isn't another way of heating it. And at that point, what you would be looking at, you would consider buying offsets. You'd normally do this on an annual basis. Having known what you've emitted, you would then buy an offset to compensate for that. Now, part of the problem with offsetting is that it's a variable quality product, and you need to know that you're buying a good quality product, that it's meeting your requirements, and it's something that if you share with people, they will appreciate that you have bought the right thing. So we will be offering services to assist people in purchasing good quality offsets. I hasten to add there, the idea of that is not that we are selling the offsets, but we're advising on the best way to procure them. When you look at all of that, it will help lead you towards a net zero future. Initially, with the 360 services, we are focusing our efforts on the energy side of it. Those of you familiar with the emission scopes, that will be scope 1 and 2 of the emissions. We are also able to help you with the scope 3, but we strongly recommend for anybody starting out on a net zero journey that you address scope 1 and 2 first and gain expertise with that part of emissions management before moving on to scope 3. And the other point as well is that scope 1 and 2 are where you'll find very cost-effective improvement. And there is an argument that I use that if everybody concentrated and did something about their scope 1 and 2 emissions, that would automatically address scope 3 emissions. But that's just a particular personal viewpoint. Now, the idea with the offering is that these would all be services that would be tailored to meet your specific needs. And how do you start with all of this? Well, the approach that we're suggesting is that we would really welcome starting a carbon conversation with you, and that initially would be an open-ended discussion with no commitment to see what your issues might be with carbon, net zero, emissions in general, and how we might be able to help you. That's a dash through the product, but I hope it puts it into context. Net zero is something we all need to address if we're going to preserve the way of life that we have going forward. We are able to help you with your net zero journey, and we can make it both cost effective, enjoyable and productive. And I think at that point I'll go to the next slide and we'll go for questions and answers.
All right, thank you very much, John. That was a really good overview. We do have a few questions, and I just want to remind everybody, if you do have some questions for us and for John, if you're a bit late coming into the webinar, please use the questions function in the control panel for the webinar. I'm going to be continue to be looking at that. So as you're asking questions, I'm going to start asking John some of the questions we've already got in. So the first one I've got here is, in your opinion, how far along are organizations in general on their net zero journey?
Well, as the standard response to any question has to be these days, that's a good question. And it is a good question. And I recently did a little bit of research work looking at a sample of companies that are saying and reporting about net zero. And I would say more or less that most of those companies that are saying something, an awful lot of them are yet to deliver. And I think part of that's to be expected, because you make a commitment and then you move along to it. But I think we've got quite a way to go. I think we can probably get along that pathway fairly quickly. I mentioned earlier, you know, that some people are good on this and some aren't. I think some of this depends on the size and complexity of your organisation. So if you're a global oil company like BP, your progress may well be a lot slower than if it is a smaller local company. But then we've had companies like Interface Flooring who've been addressing this issue long before it was trending. So I think we have, if I look at companies at the moment, I'll put them into three categories, and this is with their public reporting. There are those that are saying absolutely nothing about the issue. There are those that are saying that they are committed to do something about it and it matters to them. And then there's the third group, which is saying, you know, they're committed, they're doing something about it. So far they've done this, and next they're going to be doing that.
Okay. I've got another question here. So in your experience, who is who's driving this initiative for organizations?
Now that's a good question as well. Internally, externally, right? Externally, I think, as with a number of things, I think the supply chain will be quite a driver. You've only got to think about the quality standard, ISO 9000, how that drove quality across a wide range of businesses. I think governments, obviously, I should have said at the front end, governments will be big drivers on this. But I strongly believe that business needs to be ahead of government. I think government doesn't necessarily come up with the best solutions, and it takes some time to get there. I think it does provide a useful backdrop, but I think what comes across to me, the fact that there are companies who are going, this really makes good business sense to do this, we're going to get on with it, suggests that there is a good business imperative. Now, within an organisation, where does it get driven from? And that becomes quite interesting. Often it gets driven through a sustainability or an environmental agenda. And that can be a good way of approaching it as being part of the broader sustainability picture. I think as well, we may increasingly see with younger, more informed people joining the workforce that there will be an increasing, if you like, upward pressure from the shop floor to say that these are issues we should be addressing. And then I suppose the other one is the customer. But I think we're still very much certainly in consumer goods, we're still very much where a lot of people are driven by, they want the lowest price and they will question its environmental and carbon suitability afterwards. But we are seeing some products that are beginning to put carbon footprint information on their labels. So a variety of places. But I'm going to say, for it to be successful within a business, if it doesn't become a strategic issue driven by senior management, well, the C-suite, then it's not going to be fully realised.
Okay. So the next question I've got here, for a CEO, do you think this is in their top 3 concerns? And if not, where do you think it actually falls, and where should it fall, I guess?
Is it in their top 3? I've got a suspicion that the top 3 changes from day to day. If there's any CEO at the moment isn't well having their top 3, what's the new normal? And I could put forward an argument that green development and climate change has got to be part of the new normal. It may not be in today's top 3 for all CEOs, but it is something that is going to impact probably more or less on some of the things that are in their top 3. It's a bit of a topic that may just float beneath the surface. And if you're a CEO in certain industries that are where people are looking at it externally, you may well have it higher there. I want to throw back an interesting question to that. Do we believe that CEOs always have the right top 3 things in their top 3 priorities? And that is perhaps a cheeky response to that. But I think what I'm saying is, it may not be in the top 3. It could be. It certainly will have some impact on those things that are in the top 3. Because if profitability is one of your top 3, this is going to impact on it sooner or later.
Okay, thanks. The next question I've got, this is relating to greenhouse growers. So where do greenhouse growing companies and other agricultural companies, where do they currently generally fall within those 3 categories in terms of their level of activity in achieving net zero?
I think as yet they are later adopters. But I want to be careful because I'm generalising. As in any particular sector, there are people that are way ahead. I think in the greenhouse sector, what they can become involved in offsetting, which is another interesting approach because of being involved in growing and other things like that. I think at certain, if we move on to the agricultural food chain, I think we are seeing a bit more engagement there. And I would refer to Maple Leaf Foods again on that, because there's a picture of the more integrated. It's an interesting one. I think there are opportunities within the greenhouse sector. I think though that they may well get driven by the supply chain. And when we have organisations like Walmart saying that they want to go completely net zero, they then might start looking around and saying, well, you know, we're buying food products and things like that. We want you to tell us what the carbon footprint of your produce is. I think the sector, as in summary, I think the sector is a late adopter, but I think it's got opportunity.
Okay, thanks for that. I've got another question here. Just wondering about if you can comment on the technology, and if technology current technology is up to the challenge as far as renewables and the like, as far as their ability to, I guess, in a reasonably costly manner, you know, so it's not too expensive for the purchaser. Do you think we're there yet with renewables for those people that would like to move in that direction?
That's another good question, and I will answer that by actually referring to something in the UK. We have an organisation called the Centre for Alternative Technology, and they have produced a report called Zero Carbon Britain. And one of the, in the preface to that, they make the point that their vision of zero carbon Britain is achievable with current technology. Now, that's not to say that we couldn't do with improvement. For example, solar panels, PV solar panels are around about what, 15–20% efficient. I mean, if we could double the efficiency of those, that would help. That could make a better cost case there. Battery technology certainly could improve, and I think there is a wide range of improvements that we could benefit from. But I think at the moment we have enough technology. I think where we have a problem is understanding the problem of carbon, knowing how to do it. We've got cultural shift, we've got behavioural shifts to do. And I think if we can do those, I think we have got the technology to deliver, and to deliver cost effectively.
Okay, and kind of building on to that question, do you see, as far as kind of, you know, continuing to make those options cost effective, do you see any bodies, kind of as far as government and the like, putting up money to help this solution along?
I think they will, but the problem is do we rely? How confident we are that governments will choose the right technologies to subsidise? I think there can be an issue there. There was an interesting model again in the UK of providing tax breaks on energy efficient products. And one of the things that happened with that, and that was quite interesting, electric motors was a good example of it. They provided an incentive for people to buy more efficient motors. They've now withdrawn that because the uptake of efficient motors has taken over. And funnily enough, it was standards that have driven that as much as anything else. Perhaps part of this green recovery package could be directed and should be directed towards, renewable energies and other aspects like that. I think that is an approach there. I've got to be open. Over the years I have worked with certainly the UK government and some other governments, and I'm not sure how good they are at identifying and delivering the right solutions. And in fact, there was an independent report done for the UK and said that the government should not back specific technologies. It should provide an environment which encourages development, but not back specific technologies. I know that's not an ideal answer, but I think as well, because we always have the problem that, is it in government's top three? I think climate change is getting up there. Will it have the money? I know the UK and most other countries are currently throwing money into the economy in order to keep the economy going. And this may mean that they have a reluctance to fund other things, which is why I pin some hopes on these green recovery packages as maybe providing the support we're looking for. Sorry, it's a little rambling answer, but it's not a simple question, that one.
No, I think it's a good. I think you gave a good response to that. It is a bit of a mixed. There's a lot of things you could say on that topic for sure. So one last question. Do you think, so right now we'd kind of look at people getting into net zero, I think, as still somewhat early adopters. Do you think there's any danger in becoming an earlier adopter of, moving your company towards net zero and adopting that outlook? Do you think that that's a risk at all?
Right, that is a good question, because I'm certainly aware of you don't want to take on a technology too soon. Funny enough, I was talking about motors and drives, and the very early variable frequency drives were proved to be a little unreliable, and if you'd been an early adopter of those, you ended up not having such a good product as maybe somebody who adopted a little later. So there's always a danger of being too far in front. I think for anybody who hasn't started, they're unlikely to proceed at a rate that they could not be supported. But what I am going to say is that I would strongly counsel against somebody rushing in to make a declaration that we are going to be a net zero organisation before they fully understand what that means. And it would be better to be a little late to the party and attend in the right dress rather than turning up and then looking rather wrong because you said something and then you can't deliver, or you don't look credible because of it. So I think that's my point. You will not have a problem by adopting the technologies and processes that we're talking about of working towards net zero, but you could make a mistake by rushing out and declaring a net zero intention.
All right, thanks very much for that, John. And thanks everybody for some great questions today. I think we'll end things off there. I just wanted to once again say thanks very much to John for a very informative webinar today. I appreciate your time in joining us today. And thanks to everybody who asked some great questions. If you do have any further questions, or if you do want to know more about 360 Energy Services in this regard or in other regards as well, I know we're going to be really happy to talk to you and help answer your questions and see if we can definitely help your organization. We will be reaching out to people attending the webinar after this is over, and we will also have a recording that's going to be available. So again, we'll be touching base. Feel free to ask us some questions if you do have any more, or if you have more pointed questions you want to have answered. So once again, thanks very much, John, and thanks to everybody for attending today.
Thank you, and start a carbon conversation with us, please.
Yes, please do. Thank you.